It was the first time my parents were leaving me home alone. They were heading out of town for 4 days, and though I was technically old enough to manage, they still didn't want me staying completely alone. That's why they asked Ria to stay with me. She had been my best friend since childhood. Our moms were college friends and we practically grew up together. To everyone we were just friends. No one suspected anything more because there never had been. Till now. The evening they left, the house suddenly felt bigger and quieter than usual. Ria walked in with her duffel bag and a wide grin, making a joke about how she should start charging rent. I laughed and we settled into a rhythm like we always did. We made instant noodles for dinner, fighting over how much spice to add, then sat down to binge our favorite show. It was comfortable like it always had been. And yet there was something new, something different hiding beneath the surface. That night we stayed up talking. Nothing serious, just random stuff, funny memories from school, teasing each other like we always had. But at one point when I looked at her while she was laughing, I noticed the way her eyes crinkled, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Things I'd seen 1,000 times before, but somehow they felt different now. I didn't say anything. I didn't even let it show. But it was the first moment I caught myself seeing her as more than just Ria, my best friend. The next morning was casual. We made breakfast together. More like a mess in the kitchen, really. She accidentally dropped an egg and we both ended up laughing like idiots. We sat on the kitchen floor eating toast and sipping tea from mismatched mugs, like a scene from one of those cheesy movies she secretly liked but pretended to hate. I found myself watching her again, how she talked with her hands, how easily she fit into this space. I started wondering what it would be like if this were our everyday. Later, while she was helping me organize my bookshelf, our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, but neither of us moved away immediately. She looked at me just for a second and then turned back to the books like nothing happened. But I felt the silence settle in that room, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else. A question neither of us asked. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying moments in my head. Her laughter, that glance, that brief touch. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe nothing had changed. But my instincts told me otherwise. Something had shifted. And it wasn't just in me. I was starting to think maybe she felt it too. The next day started off normally, but there was a subtle shift in how we acted around each other. We weren't avoiding each other, but we weren't entirely ourselves either. The jokes felt a little forced, the silences a little heavier. We both noticed it, but neither said anything. Around noon, the electricity went out due to some local maintenance. We sat by the window, phones in hand, making dumb guesses about when it would come back. But with nothing to do, we started talking. At first it was light stuff again. School gossip, teachers we didn't like, the usual. But as time passed, the conversation drifted to more personal things. Ria asked me if I remembered my first crush. I laughed and said, yeah, probably in 3rd grade. Didn't even know what a crush was. She smiled and said she had one too, but never told anyone. Then she paused, like she was thinking whether to go on or not. Eventually, she just looked at me and asked, have you ever liked someone close to you? Her tone wasn't teasing. It was quiet, sincere. I said yes, and that was the first real moment of honesty between us in a long time. After that, the mood changed. Not in a dramatic way, but in how we sat, how we looked at each other. It felt more intentional. I noticed how she leaned closer while speaking, how her voice softened when we were alone in the quiet house. At one point, she shared how she always thought I'd end up with someone loud and outgoing, someone unlike her. I asked why, and she said she thought I never saw her that way. I didn't respond right away because I wasn't sure what to say. The truth was, I had started seeing her differently. Not suddenly, but gradually, without realizing it. Later in the evening, we were lying on opposite sides of the couch, tired of board games and phone scrolling. The silence was comfortable again, but also filled with something unspoken. Ria suddenly asked, do you think friendships can change? I looked at her and she looked back. I nodded slowly and said, they can. Sometimes you don't even see it happening. She held that gaze for a second longer than usual, then turned away with a small smile. That night before bed, she lingered by my door. We were saying goodnight like usual, but she didn't walk away immediately. Instead, she said softly, I never told you this, but never mind, it's stupid. I asked her to say it, but she shook her head and smiled. Maybe tomorrow, she whispered and walked off. I stood there for a few seconds, heart beating fast, wondering what she was about to say. I had a feeling it wasn't nothing. I had a feeling that whatever it was, it would change everything. The next morning we both pretended everything was the same. We cracked jokes over breakfast, argued about which cereal tasted better, but the air between us was undeniably different. We weren't touching but we were close. We weren't talking about last night but it was there, in the pauses, in the way we kept looking away mid-sentence. She avoided eye contact more than usual and I was overthinking every word I said. It was like we were both aware of something new but too afraid to name it. By the afternoon it was getting hard to act normal. We decided to go out to get some snacks from the nearby shop, mostly as an excuse to step out of the house. On the way we barely talked. It wasn't awkward, it was loaded. I could feel her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't noticing. I did the same. When we got back she suddenly asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, said I was fine, but she didn't buy it. She looked at me for a long second, then said, "You've been weird since yesterday." I didn't deny it. I just stood there unsure what to say. Eventually I asked, "Did something happen between us?" She hesitated before answering. Then she said, "I don't know. Maybe. Did it feel like that to you?" I said yes. She looked down and whispered, "I thought I was imagining it." That moment, those few words, were heavier than anything we'd said before. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. I told her I didn't know when it started, but somewhere along the way she stopped being just my friend. She was quiet, processing. Then she said, "I felt that way too. For a while. But I didn't want to ruin what we have." I told her I felt the same, and that was the scariest part. It was easier when it was just friendship. It was simpler. But now we both knew it wasn't that anymore. We sat in silence after that, not because we had nothing to say, but because the truth had finally settled between us. There was no going back to what we were before. But neither of us wanted to rush forward either. At one point our hands touched again, and this time neither of us moved away. We didn't hold hands. We just let them rest there side by side. It wasn't physical. It was something else. Acknowledgement, maybe. A quiet agreement that something had changed and we were both okay with it. She looked at me and said, "So what now?" I didn't have an answer. I just said, "We don't have to decide today." She smiled a little sadly and nodded. We both knew that whatever this was, it mattered. And we'd have to figure it out. But for now we were just sitting there in the in-between where feelings had been spoken but not yet acted on. By the time my parents came back, everything on the surface looked the same. The house was clean, we had groceries, and nothing seemed out of place. But inside, everything had shifted. Ria and I weren't acting different around them. We still joked and teased like always, but we were both more aware of each other. Every glance felt heavier. Every silence carried weight. We didn't talk about it again, not right away. It was as if naming it once was enough to make it real, but neither of us was in a hurry to define it. A few days later, after she had gone back to her place, I got a message from her late at night. Just a simple, "Can't sleep. Thinking about that night." I stared at the screen for a few minutes before replying, "Same here. Still don't know what to make of it." She sent back, "Maybe we don't need to make sense of it all at once." That was Ria. Always calm, always measured. She didn't push. She let things breathe. We kept texting late at night over the next week. More honest than before. More open. She asked if I ever regretted saying how I felt. I told her no, not even for a second. She said she didn't either. We weren't in a relationship and we hadn't made promises. But we both knew that line we'd never crossed before was now behind us. And we weren't trying to erase it. Eventually we met again. Nothing fancy. Just coffee and a walk. But this time there was no pretending. We talked openly. She said she was scared of losing the friendship if this didn't work out. I told her I was too. But I also said, maybe it's worth the risk. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, maybe it is. There was no kiss, no dramatic moment. Just two people choosing to be honest. Choosing to let something begin slowly, carefully. Over time our dynamic shifted naturally. We didn't announce anything to anyone. We still laughed like best friends, still argued about movies and food. But there were little changes. How she held my arm when we walked, how I looked at her when she wasn't watching. It wasn't fireworks. It was quiet. And in some ways more powerful than anything sudden or dramatic. Looking back, I realized we didn't fall in love in those 4 days. We just stopped ignoring what had always been there. It took the silence of an empty house, the absence of distractions, to finally see each other fully. And once we did, we couldn't unsee it. We didn't rush it. We didn't force it. We just allowed it. Sometimes, love doesn't come with a grand declaration. Sometimes it begins with shared space, unspoken moments, and slow truths. That's what happened between us. And maybe that's what made it real.